2.5 hours. That's how long it took American forces to knock out the air defenses around Caracas, pull a sitting president out of his own capital, and put him on a plane to a courtroom in New York. And it wasn't the only one. Weeks earlier, the most wanted man in the hemisphere, the boss of Mexico's most powerful cartel, turned up dead, killed by Mexican troops running an American targeting file. Then Washington squeezed Panama until it gave back the canal. 3 countries, 3 months, 3 completely different weapons, a raid, an intelligence file, a chokehold on trade. That's not chaos, it's a doctrine. And a doctrine works down a list. Which is why, from Ottawa to Buenos Aires, every capital is asking the same quiet question. Who's next? 200 years ago, the United States drew a line around this half of the world and told everyone else to stay out, the Monroe Doctrine. In 2026, somebody rewrote it, shorter, colder. Analysts are calling it a Trump corollary, so let's use the obvious name, Donald plus Monroe, the Don-Roe Doctrine. And it rests on a single claim. This hemisphere belongs to America, and power comes before rules. So, who's next? Ask around and almost everyone points to the same place, the one he keeps naming out loud.
And you know, all my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah.
Cuba, America's oldest enemy, 90 miles off the coast, a country he says is ready to fall. It's the obvious answer. And in this story, the obvious answer is the wrong one. Because this doctrine doesn't move on history, or grudges, or whoever's in the headlines. It moves on a colder calculation. And once you learn to read the map the way Washington reads it, the real target stops hiding. It's the one place this doctrine just lost. Stay with me. By the end, you'll see it before I say it. Start with what the doctrine says. Not what its critics read into it, what the administration says out loud. When the State Department laid out its position, it used 3 words. This is our hemisphere. After Maduro was taken, Trump said American dominance in the Western Hemisphere would never be questioned again, and that Washington would run Venezuela until it got the transition it wanted. That sounds like old American language. But it's a bigger claim than it seems. Look at where it came from. In 1823, President Monroe drew a line. Europe was no longer welcome to colonize the Americas. A keep-out sign pointed at the Old World. In 1904, Theodore Roosevelt went further and claimed the right to step directly into a neighbor's affairs, to police the hemisphere. This third draft is blunter than both. Monroe said, Europe, stay out. Roosevelt said, we'll police our neighbors. This version says the whole hemisphere is America's to command. 200 years, and the rule just kept getting shorter and heavier. But a claim is only words. The real question is how you turn words into control. And in 2025, that started happening, quietly. None of this started with a raid. It started with a map and a new name on it. Day 1 of the second term, Trump renames the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Mostly symbolic, but it set the tone. This hemisphere is ours even to rename. Then came the words. Canada, he said, should stop being a country and become the 51st state. Its prime minister summoned and lectured like a junior partner. The Panama Canal, given away in 1999, should be taken back. And Greenland? Greenland, he said, America would get one way or another. Keep that one in your back pocket. For most of 2025, it stayed talk. Provocative, but talk. Underneath the talk, though, something more concrete was taking shape. money as a weapon. When Argentina's economy started to wobble before a crucial vote, Trump didn't send threats. He sent a lifeline. Roughly $20 billion, openly to keep an ideological ally in power. He framed it as helping a great philosophy take over a great country. And that's the half of this doctrine most people miss. It isn't only a stick for governments that defy Washington. It's a carrot for the ones that fall in line. Then the talk hardened into policy. The national security strategy put it in writing. American preeminence across the hemisphere and a vow to deny rivals control of anything strategically vital in the region. On paper, it read like a footnote. Weeks later, the world saw what it meant. Maduro's capture was the doctrine made literal, and the official reason was drugs. But watch what happened next. Sanctions lifted. Oil licenses issued. A 50 million barrel supply deal, with the first hundreds of millions of dollars landing within weeks, and billions more on the way. And Trump said the quiet part out loud. That revenue, he announced, would be controlled by him, as president. Here's the thing about Venezuela. It sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. So this was never really a drug bust. It was a resource play, wearing the language of a drug war. And the new government that took over? Led by Maduro's own former vice president. Same machinery left in place, while the oil started flowing north. Then the doctrine did something subtler. It bent an ally. For a year, Trump had leaned on Mexico. Go after your cartel bosses, or we will. So when El Mencho was killed in February, it was Mexican troops who pulled the trigger. But they were working off an American targeting package. Same drug war banner. Notice the shift. In Venezuela, America acted. In Mexico, America made an ally act, pressing a sovereign neighbor into running Washington's operation on its own soil. And it didn't stop. The strikes, the pressure, they rolled on into mid-2026. This wasn't one dramatic year. It was becoming the new normal. Step back from the individual raids, and a shape appears. This isn't improvisation. It's a doctrine. And a doctrine has a logic to who gets the stick and who gets the carrot. So look at the targets. Venezuela's president, captured. Colombia's leftist president, Gustavo Petro, sanctioned by Washington, his U.S. visa pulled, branded by Trump a drug leader who wouldn't be doing it much longer. Cuba, which Trump says is ready to fall, and which he's promised to take. All of them governed by the left. Now look at who gets the bailouts and the praise. Argentina's libertarian president, Paraguay's conservative, El Salvador's hardliner, all of them on the right. So this was never just about domination. And that's the turn. Because great powers always want domination. That part's boring. Every empire in history wanted that. This is something more specific. This doctrine isn't just controlling the hemisphere, it's reshaping it, punishing the governments Washington wants gone, propping up the ones it likes. Not just control, alignment. And Colombia is the cleanest version of the whole machine. Its leftist president was constitutionally barred from running again. A right-wing outsider, openly endorsed by Trump, won the June 2026 runoff by less than a point. No raid, no soldiers. The ballot box did the work. Why invade what an election will hand you? And here's why that matters. The moment you see that this is realignment, not random aggression, not just grabbing whatever's nearby, everything changes. Realignment runs on a logic. And a logic can be read. So stop asking what America will do next. Start asking what the pattern predicts. But before we read it, one question has to be answered. The real question was never why America wants this. The question is how it gets away with it. 3 reasons, and all 3 will matter for what's coming. First, raw power. When U.S. forces took Maduro, the cost to America was almost nothing. Remember the number, Not one American died. That's the whole equation. If the cost of acting is near zero, and everyone watching knows it, you don't even have to act. The credibility of the raid is enough to bend a government. Force you never have to use is the cheapest force there is. Second, money and oil. The dollar runs global trade. That turns tariffs and sanctions into weapons most countries simply can't answer. Control the flow of money and the flow of oil, and you often don't need soldiers at all. The leverage does the work. And third, the targets are alone. Latin America is too divided to form a united front. The rivals are distracted. China deep in its own slowdown, Russia buried in Ukraine. And there's a trick waiting at home. If the target sits in this hemisphere, Washington can sell the move not as a foreign war, but as cleaning up its own backyard. No coalition forms. No rival steps in. The neighborhood is left alone with the strongest house on the block. Near zero cost, unanswerable leverage, isolated targets. On paper, nothing stops this doctrine. Except something already has, because it isn't winning everywhere. And the further it reaches, the harder it breaks. Greenland was supposed to be easy. Instead, it became the first real defeat. When Trump moved to take the island from Denmark, a NATO ally, and backed it with tariff threats climbing toward 25% on Europe, the response wasn't surrender. It was the opposite. Denmark dug in. NATO allies staged a show of force in the Arctic, not an army, a tripwire, designed to make any American move impossible without firing on the alliance itself. Greenlanders rejected joining the U.S., overwhelmingly. And at Davos in January, Trump backed off, on the force and on the tariffs. The harder Washington pushed, the tighter the alliance it was pressuring closed ranks. And Greenland wasn't alone. Panama slipped the noose, gave ground on its ports, but kept the canal in its own hands. The one time the doctrine reached outside the hemisphere, a 2026 war with Iran, oil and fuel prices spiked. The exact global chaos this strategy was built to keep America out of. Even the carrots hedged their bets. Argentina took its $20 billion, then weeks later recommitted to trade with China, the very rival the doctrine exists to push out. And the costs are real. The wider Venezuela campaign killed scores of people, and a bloc of Latin American governments, joined by Spain, condemned it as a dangerous precedent. There's even a reading worth taking seriously, that there's no grand strategy here at all, just foreign policy as spectacle, improvised, raid by raid. But either way, the lesson is the same. This doctrine is powerful, not invincible. It works on the weak and the isolated, and it stumbles the moment it meets a united front, which tells you exactly where to look for what comes next. So let's read the map. Washington doesn't pick targets at random. 4 things put a country in the crosshairs. 1. A strategic asset. Oil, a choke point, a location worth controlling. 2. A weak or isolated hand, a government with no powerful friends to call. 3. A leader Washington wants gone. 4. A foothold held by a rival, Chinese ports, Russian influence, something America wants to pry loose. The more boxes a country checks, the closer it sits to the front of the line. So run the candidates. Cuba? Cuba checks almost every box. Weak, isolated, adversarial, but it's missing the one that matters most. No asset worth the trouble, and it's already collapsing on its own. Trump says as much himself. He keeps calling it ready to fall. So why spend a single soldier on a country that's falling for free? The loudest name on the list is the one that isn't worth the taking. Colombia? It already answered the question itself, at the ballot box. Mexico? Rich in leverage, but too deeply wired into the U.S. economy to risk a real rupture. And Canada? The assets are right there. Energy, minerals, the Arctic, more land than almost anyone. He's floated it out loud. Stop being a country, become the 51st state. But Canada is a G7 power, a full member of the alliance, an economy fused to America's at every seam. You don't annex that. The 51st state line is pressure, not a plan. And then there's a wild card. Reported questioning of Britain's claim to the Falklands, a hint the appetite may not stop at Latin America at all. Cross them all off, and one name is left. The one I told you was hiding in plain sight. If you're forced to name one, watch Greenland. I know. We just called Greenland the doctrine's defeat. And at first, it looks like the answer that breaks our own rule. Because Greenland isn't isolated, it has NATO at its back. That's exactly why the first attempt stalled. But forget the obstacle for a second. Look at the prize. This isn't just a strategic asset, it's a treasure. Start with the ground itself. Some of the largest rare earth deposits on Earth, the minerals inside every phone, every missile, every microchip, in a world where China controls roughly 70% of the supply. Billions of barrels of oil underneath. But the real prize isn't what's under Greenland. It's where Greenland sits, the top of the world. Take the island, and America doesn't just gain ground, it plants itself at the center of the Arctic, right on Russia's northern flank. More presence over the pole, more pressure on Moscow. It's the high ground of the next century, and the one place that lets you lean straight on America's biggest rival. A doctrine built on controlling resources and on boxing out rivals cannot leave that on the table. So watch how the missing boxes get filled. And here's the sleight of hand. Russia in the Arctic is real, but there's no rival foothold on Greenland itself. No Chinese ships in its harbors. No Russian flag on its ice. So the real backdrop gets bent into an imminent threat. If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will. A genuine rivalry, inflated into a reason to move, strength writing its own rules. And the last thing protecting the island? That NATO shield? Washington is loosening from the inside. Furious that allies sat out his war on Iran, Trump has branded NATO a paper tiger, pulled troops from Europe, and floated walking away from the alliance altogether. Every crack in NATO is a crack in the wall around Greenland. The defeat wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening move. Today's defeat is next year's target. But maybe the sharpest answer isn't a country at all, because the real lesson of the Don Road Doctrine isn't a name on a map. It's the rule underneath it. The who will keep changing. Greenland today, someone else tomorrow, a name we haven't even thought of the year after that. What stays fixed is the principle, the one every government in this hemisphere now has to live with. That in 2026, strength comes before rules. And if that's the rule, then there's only one real form of protection left. Not a treaty, not an alliance, not a friend in Washington. Just this: don't be worth the taking. So when you look at the map now, don't ask who America wants. Ask who's worth it, and who's alone. Because that's how the board reads now, and everyone on it already knows.